Hi everyone and welcome back to Plainest Pages. Today we're talking about To My 9-Year-Old Self by Helen Dunmore. This is another poem on the Edexcel A-level English literature curriculum, and let's get started with the summary. Helen Dunmore goes into a nostalgic dive into the past, addressing herself as a 9-year-old. She compares her body then to her body now and reflects on how much her personality has changed and how much her mindset has changed and how much she has lost and gained by getting older. This is an emotional poem reflecting on change and growth that I'm sure will make everyone feel heard in some way, and it covers themes of childhood, history, the past, the present. It can be compared to The Deliverer in terms of, for example, growing up and birth, but I think it would be useful to draw connections to history, or genetics, or an easy passage to compare specifically aging. The tone is nostalgic and wistful, but there's a balance between glorification and idealization and true realism, realizing that childhood was not as perfect as it seems looking back on it, but it was still a pretty nice era in our life, just like every moment is in our short and fragile brief moments. The structure is 6 uneven stanzas with no rhyme scheme, there's no discernible meter. It makes the poem feel more natural, like a conversation rather than a poem, and this is further accentuated by the use of more colloquial language, by the use of more personal language. The poem builds in line lengths, with the second stanza being longer than the first, and the third stanza being longer than the second, and then they start to diminish in lengths, reflecting how at first the speaker goes back into the past and she's older, and then she's slowly moving back into the future, aka the present, by really reflecting on her childhood experience and where she was then and where she is now. Although the speaker admires and longs after her childhood self, she wistfully realizes that she can never go back to that time, which adds to the melancholy and reflective tone of the poem. You must forgive me. Don't look so surprised, perplexed and eager to be gone, balancing on your hands or on the tightrope. You would rather run than walk, rather climb than run, rather leap from a height than anything. The poem begins with a direct address to her younger self. There's a lot of the use of you. The second person makes us feel much more involved, much more a part of the story. But from the onset, there is also the use of the personal pronoun me, I, which feels much more personal. So it makes us feel involved, but at the same time realize that this is a very personal experience for the speaker. The tone here is quite reassuring as the adult tries to calm her younger self who's eager to be gone. She tries to urge her younger self to pay heed to these words, but the sad thing is she knows that her younger self would never. This is the issue about the past. As much as we long to go back and fix our mistakes, we can't. But even if we did, then we would have never learned from those mistakes in the first place. Her younger self would rather run than walk, climb than run. This repetition emphasizes that her younger self just wants to go out, be out and about in this world, to never stop, to never pay attention to a single moment, to always be out there looking for new experiences. And the sad part is, of course, those new experiences are necessary, but the older self just wants to go back and have the chance to actually properly enjoy the moment too. By contrast, if we're looking at now, the adult self also wants to sit down and have a proper conversation, and the younger self does not. So from the onset, their differences are highlighted and contrasted. Because this poem is also written like a dialogue, it reinforces this idea that this is a self-reflection, because it's quite literally a dialogue between the old and the young. There's a caesura after forgive me, so it acts as an emotional pause. The adult self tries to appeal to her younger self, but she can't help but feel that by growing up and by changing, by aging in her body, by aging as an individual, she has somehow done her younger self wrong. This line forewarns us that there's some sort of betrayal, emotional betrayal, and it's not going to be a happy, cheerful poem exactly. The emotional layer is further accentuated by the use of frequent commas and jammets, forgive me, don't look so surprised, perplexed, eager to be gone. The imperative of must, you must forgive me. It also makes the sentence a bit more forceful. It makes us a lot more apprehensive. The apprehension turns out to be justified because of the next stanza. I have spoiled this body we once shared. Look at the scars and watch the way I move, careful of a bad back or a bruised foot. Do you remember how, 3 minutes after waking, we jumped straight out of the ground floor window into the summer morning? In contrast with the first stanza that showed us the never-ending energy and health of her younger self, the older self has scars, Because she has been hurt before, she's now cautious, even careful of a bad back or a bruised foot. The semantics of injury show us that time herself has bruised her. It makes us wistful of our childhood health and our childhood body when you can jump out of the ground floor window with no consequences. This could also be a metaphor for the whole of life in general. As children, we're out there jumping out of windows, climbing up trees, never really cautious of getting hurt, because we know that we can get up and brush off our mistakes. In adulthood, everyone expects you to have it all together, to be this most educated person, the most sensible one, the most responsible one, to never get into situations you might regret. As children, we're out there pursuing opportunities. We don't ever let somebody else's thoughts define us, somebody's warning to stop us from trying the things that we value. We're the ones here to define our own boundaries, but by contrast, weirdly enough, as adults, we should be out there defining our boundaries, but we're actually more in control of society's pressure. We let society's perception of us dictate our entire existence. We begin to live in accordance of what people think we should act like. And do you remember? For the speaker's adult self, it's just a distant memory. Like, do you remember what it was like when you could do all these things? But for the child, it's the present. Of course she doesn't remember. She has not yet learned that life is temporary, to be careful, or to value her present moments. I mean, once she woke up, she would jump out of the window. She would be too impatient for stairs, too impatient to take the time to do something slowly. She's out there rushing and grabbing the world. She would defy convention, pursue what's most exciting. Summer morning. I mean, it's a pathetic fallacy because morning is just the beginning. Just like every day brings a new journey, a new adventure. This reflects the idea of the youth as a blank slate for the artist to paint whatever they want. This metaphor is then continued in the next stanza. That dream we had, no doubt it's as fresh in your mind as the white paper to write it on. We made a start, but something else came up. A baby vole or a bag of sherbet lemons. And besides, that summer of ambition created a nice lolly factory, a wasp trap, and a den by a cesspit. We don't know what this dream is, but perhaps it has something to do with being a writer. Perhaps Dunmore, even as a child, has always wanted to write her own stories, to always write her own books. She would lay out the piece of paper by her desk and be like, okay, when morning comes, when creativity comes, I will sit down and I will write. But something always comes up. For children, something always comes up, which is why we don't realize our childhood dreams. But at the same time, she's always sure that it will come up. She's not worried when something else came up because she views it as a certainty rather than a hope or a wish. I mean, she has that childhood confidence where you believe that even if you don't do something, it will magically happen because things always work out. The white paper on which she wants to write is a blank slate, just like she currently is. But it's dramatic irony because, of course, this white page is far from being empty. It's very meaningful. It's full of meaning for the poet and for the younger self even when she doesn't realize it. Something else is all the distractions of daily life, the fascination with nature, the baby voles, the bag of sherbet lemons. I mean, it's that sweet taste of sugar of childhood that you can never really go back to, and it can never really taste the same because back then it was the promise that life is good and everything will be alright. This is a summer of ambition. The young Dunmore makes plenty of plans to trap wasps, to make a den, to run her own ice lolly factor. The tone of the stanza is very nostalgic as we realize that these dreams never really realized. And if you're watching now, just reflect on how many of your dreams you ended up chasing. It's inevitable that it's not everything, but how much did you give up just because you grew up? We know Dunmore will be a poet. She will chase that dream, something her younger self never realized, but all these other dreams have been left discarded. But here we see a change of tone of Alta as we realize that the childhood was not as idyllic as it seems. I'd like to say we could be friends, but the truth is we have nothing in common beyond a few shared years. I won't keep you then. Time to pick rose hips for tuppence a pound, time to hide down scared lanes for men in cars after grown children. We see a growing divide between the speaker and her younger self. The poet realizes that she could never be fully friends with her younger self because they have grown too far apart. This is also the moment that the poem begins to diminish in length as we shift away from the past and to the present by comparing it, by seeing the similarities and by seeing the differences. The speaker is saddened, but this time she realizes that there is no point in chasing after the disappeared past. It's no use to really explain to her younger self what she's missing if she doesn't live and enjoy it. She lets her younger self go, and she remembers the dangerous moments of her childhood that she never realized. How she'd pick roses and sell them, but how there'd be men chasing her down lanes. I mean, for many of us, I'm sure there's at least one moment in our childhood where we did something incredibly stupid and incredibly dangerous without realizing it. Scared lanes. The lanes are personified. They're portrayed as the ones being scared in a childlike attempt to bluster and say, I'm not scared of men in cars chasing me back when roses were sold for tuppence, back when prices were still good. She's pretending to be courageous because her desire to go out as a child is more than her fear of the world, or to lunge out over the water on the rope that swings from that tree, long buried in housing. But no, I shan't cloud your morning. God knows I have fears enough for us both. She remembers how she used to swing over the water, never looking down into the water or down under, letting the fear bolster her rather than stop her from climbing that rope. She never considered the height or the danger, but even if she was suddenly brave enough to do it now, she couldn't, because that tree is no longer there, cut down in favor of housing. Because even if she is not ready to move on, the world always is. The world is always rushing and changing and going fast ahead, and it's out there to pull us back when we think that we can go back. Do not cloud your morning. For the younger self, this would just be a temporary warning from a strange old lady. Listen once, forget the next day. While for the older self, of course, it's a warning that stems from years of experience. The older self also realizes that she has fears enough for us both. She lets her nerves fully consume her. There is now not only a sense of physical division, but mental division too. The cloud is also a representation of Dunmore's self. She realizes that she's a cloud, clouding her younger self experience. So she's out there tampering her childhood, and she realizes that, well, it's a childhood. It's an experience. You only live once, and you can never really listen to all the advice because you're still going to make your own mistakes and still going to be your own person. And in that moment, she decides to take her own leave. I leave you in an ecstasy of concentration, slowly peeling a ripe scab from your knee to taste it on your tongue. The speaker finally leaves the topic and leaves her younger self, ending the poem. Meanwhile, the younger self is left happily to pick a scab and eat it, knowing that it's something her parents told her not to do. The scab is described as ripe, as ideal for picking, because her childhood self has patiently waited for this moment. Now she's happily bathing in the results of her labor. She's tasting it, just like her older self tasted and savored the childhood. But notice that already she has a scab, a bruise. Already those carefree moments of easy childhood are fading away, and she's becoming older and aging. Her limits are being pushed, physically and mentally. These are the last few carefree moments, and by leaving, Dunmore ensures that she doesn't bring any more of the adult world concerns into her younger self's happy life. By letting her pick the scab, she's hoping that her younger self will similarly enjoy the rest of her childhood. She expresses the wish that we would do more things more freely and more happily and more slowly, really savoring them. Just like she wants to do it now, realizing that she has let her childhood go. Now she wants to enjoy her adulthood in the same way, knowing that soon she will become older and death is just around the corner. So on that cheery reminder to enjoy the present because the end is always over the horizon, we are going to end this video. I hope it was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Please stay tuned for more videos, comment your thoughts, and I'll see you soon.